homesteads gone to seed, the tottering barns, the church clock towers, the decaying edges of cities, the valleys carved by a million years of flowing water. People looked at me askance when told of this lark. They were repelled, I think, by the mere idea of walking this stretch of ground. They saw a stooped figure skulking past the wharves of Baltimore and treading along the shoulder of Interstate 95. They saw a tall man with graying hair tossed in the lee of careening semis and grubbing for Cinnabons at the Molly Pitcher service area. "And for what purpose?" they would ask. "Purpose?" I said to one baffled inquirer over dinner one evening, a decorator of Georgetown sitting rooms. We were dining at a table for 6. It was winter. Snow fell outside. "To walk until I summoned forgotten thoughts, to assay the landscape and the state of mind of the citizenry, to measure distance by footfall, to take in a horizon that is impossibly far away, and then put it behind me." Those were roughly my words, anyway. "Oh, so you hope to clear your head," was her response. You could say that. Truth is, there was no concise encapsulation of the purpose for this walk. One could summon Buddha or Wordsworth or Thoreau's humble paddling on the Concord and Merrimack rivers. One could note that Thoreau never once paused to explain the purpose of his paddle, that later became his first gem of a book, A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. All that the Concord River contained, the occasional logs and stems of trees, the shining pebbles, the floating cranberries, were objects of singular interest to me, he wrote, and at last I resolved to launch myself on its bosom and float whither it would bear me. To which I said, "Precisely." My intent, like his, was to take a singular interest in all I encountered, to turn my attentions away from the noxious chatter of Washington, the tribal feuding on television and computer screens, and care only for the particularities I found along the way, to shrink my horizons to that of a walking man, and to root my views of the world in what I encountered step by step, to honor and respect what I saw. "Attention," the late poet Mary Oliver wrote, "is the beginning of devotion." I had obsessed for months over so much that seemed relevant to this walk. The remaining traces of the earliest people, the Algonquin and Lenape and all the others. The first mapping of the land. The flow here and there of the Dutch, the Swedes, the English, Germans, Scots-Irish. The fleeing streams of men and women escaping slavery, and later Jim Crow. The battlefields I would pass through, and the routes the soldiers took, coursing this way and that. The felling of the trees, the tilling of the land, and the killing of its wildlife, to where barely a bird remained. How brawny men made the steel and laid the tracks for the trains to run. How the native trails turned into cart tracks, stage routes, toll roads, and finally into the highways I would skirt as I made my way north. My walk was, in reality, its own explanation. You embark on a long solitary stroll, in part, so as not to explain it. You go to cast aside all such distractions. You go for the fun of it, the promise of pure serendipity, and simply because you can, as though the entire way there you should walk beneath a red banner of freedom, with trumpets tooting, like some footloose believer drawn by the lure of Jerusalem. Possum ergo faciam. I can, therefore I will. Ahead of me now, hours and days and weeks down the road, stood the glistening monuments, the ruins, the river valleys, the proud farms, the abandoned railroad tracks, the battlefields, the grave markers, the malls, distribution warehouses, freeways, IHOPs, Taco Bells. In medieval times, the pilgrims who walked to Rome or Jerusalem would turn a ring or a badge or a necklace into a contact relic by touching it to some holy cloth or the whitened shank of a saint. Some would chip a flake of marble from a shrine.